One more minute. Twenty more seconds to finish up, and then we will come back together for the lecture. That is time on the do now. Before I share my screen, I just want to get my lecture notes up. So you may have noticed that I did not post a lecture outline template for us today. That is because, unfortunately, in college, your professors are not going to give you a lecture template outline for when you take notes. So we're officially gonna take a break with those templates, see how we do, because it's important that you guys practice and take notes in an authentic way. As a reminder, I'm going to share my screen and show one of the slides that we will be going over today. So we'll look at this slide, for example, if I can get it come up. So like in this slide, the title of the slide is U.S. Foreign Policy Review. What you're going to be wanting to focus on are the things I say in regards to Washington's farewell, the Monroe Doctrine, and Alaska. So the title of the slide is the biggest one on the top, and then it's those key terms that you're going to want to focus on. While you are taking notes, do so in a way that is the most constructive to you, where you get the most amount of information. And that can be either typed, handwritten, whichever you prefer. Just make sure you do so in a way that you can either take pictures or submit a copy of those notes to your classwork packet for full credit for joining class today. So we're going to go ahead and get started. The name of today's lecture is U.S. Imperialism from 1880 to 1910. So I'm going to set a timer for 1 minute to get our either Google Doc or paper, whichever way we are choosing to take notes. I'm going to give us 1 minute to get it set up with this title. Please chat a 100 when you are ready to start taking notes. 1 minute to get yourself set up. Go ahead and get started. And again, chat a 100 when you are ready. Thank you, Arabia. Thank you, Sierra. Thank you, Jalasia. Thanks, Shakeem. 30 more seconds to get yourself taken set up. Thank you to Kia, Mila, Kayla, Heaven. Thank you, Soraya. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Samaj. Okay, 5 more seconds to get yourself ready. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Giovanni. Thank you, Eddie. Okay, I think that is basically everybody. So again, we're going to be doing a lecture today on imperialism from 1880 to 1910. Imperialism, I know, is familiar to you guys from Mr. Quinn's class, but you guys know it from a world history perspective instead of an American perspective. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start with the framing of Hawaii and explain how Hawaii is like a perfect example of what American imperialism looks like. So far in the late 1800s to early 1900s, we've discussed in the Industrial Revolution, we have discussed progressivism, and now we're going to transition to imperialism to understand how the United States went from a decent country, like a country that could take care of itself, to a world power. So to start, I'm going to talk about the Kingdom of Hawaii. On the screen in front of you is the Queen of Hawaii, Liliuokalani. And in 1893, her nation of Hawaii was overthrown by a group of businessmen. They took over Hawaii because they wanted more control over sugar and pineapples. Most of these businessmen were backed by the US military because of the profit that was sitting in Hawaii. And the leader of this group is the man on the screen, Sanford Dole, who is the founder, who is cousins with the founder of the Dole Company, which I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of in grocery stores. In five years, Hawaii would be annexed under the guise of the United States and became the 50th state in 1959. Now, in the chat, tell me, is this story surprising? Is the story of Hawaii being overtaken by a group of businessmen surprising? Okay, see lots of no's. Why? Why are we all saying no? Take 30 seconds in the chat. Mela, I don't know if that was a pun or accurate. Like, I don't know if that was an accident or a pun, but either way it works. Okay, so the man who took over's name was Sanford Dole, which I just put in the chat, and they became the 50th state in 1959. Now we're going to take a step back. Now we're going to take a step back and review what was the do now and some of the important American foreign policies before this. As we hopefully remember from the founding of the country, in George Washington's farewell address, he told Americans to stay out of foreign affairs. And because of Washington's advice, the United States had a policy of isolationism. So again, the United States, because of Washington's farewell address, had a period of isolationism. They wanted to be left alone and they wanted to leave others alone. And for a while, the United States followed his advice. Oops, that was too far. But things slowly started to change. Starting in 1820, the Monroe Doctrine was the main principle of foreign policy. The United States declared that they would stay out of European affairs. So again, they said, we will not involve ourselves in European issues. However, they also warned and told Europe that they should not enter the Western Hemisphere. So again, in the Monroe Doctrine, we will stay out of European affairs, but Europe better stay out of the Western Hemisphere. And by Western Hemisphere, basically all of North and South America. However, as we know, in North America, the United States never had any problem with spreading west and taking over foreign nations. Through periods like the Mexican-American War. After the Civil War, the United States started messing around with being an imperialist nation, specifically with Alaska. In 1867, Congress agreed to purchase Alaska from Russia. And as you can see on the map on the screen, Alaska is pretty far removed from the United States. So again, they bought Alaska from Russia in 1867. But most Americans did not support this. They thought that this was a huge mistake and ultimately a waste of money. So even though they started to mess around with being an imperialist nation, the American public wasn't sold on it. However, as we know, Americans' foreign policy and experience with imperialism would change. And I believe this is something you guys learned with Mr. Quinn last year. I could be wrong. The main motivations for expansion are what are known as the 5 Ds. And these 5 motivations are this. The first is Darwinism. And Darwinism is the belief that Americans should help the uncivilized or unfit. So yeah, Darwinism, Americans should help the uncivilized and unfit. Those words should be in quotations. So when America involved themselves with other nations, they believed that they were given the gift of education and all of that other stuff. The second motivation for foreign involvement is destiny, which is similar to manifest destiny, the belief that Americans had the God-given right to expand their influence. The third is dollar, which is exactly what it sounds. Americans should expand and increase their trade to make more money. The fourth is diplomacy and dominance. Diplomacy and dominance refers to the belief that Americans should increase their role in global politics. So it's this belief that Americans should be a more global power. And finally, the fifth reason or motivation for expansion is democracy, which Americans believed that they should spread the ideas of democracy to other lands who have unsuitable governments. So again, very quickly, Darwinism, Americans should help the uncivilized or unfit. Destiny, Americans have the God-given right to expand. Dollar, Americans should expand and increase trade and their economic standing. Diplomacy, Americans should establish their power as a global in the global economy and politics. I can't say that word. And finally, democracy. Americans should spread the ideas of a democracy to other lands that have unsuitable governments. Now, who's encouraging this? That's next. Who is encouraging imperialism? One major group that championed the idea of imperialism were missionaries. Missionaries are people who traveled abroad and believed in the racial superiority of whites. So they believed that whites were racially superior. And it was their Christian duty to spread Christianity to the rest of the world. The second major group that supported imperialism are the Republicans. They wanted to spread west because they saw it as an economic opportunity. So again, Republicans wanted to spread for economic opportunity. This includes Theodore Roosevelt, and U.S. Navy Captain Alfred Thayer Mahan, which you can see his name on the screen. He wrote this book. Alfred Thayer Mahan. Mahan argued that the United States had to have a strong navy in order to establish power. So again, he believed they needed a strong navy to establish power. And because of his influence, by 1900, the United States had the third largest navy in the entire world. So again, because of Captain Mahan, the United States had the third largest navy in the world by 1900. Now, where did the United States go? Where did we start to spread our imperialistic thought? The first major area that we invaded is Latin America. In 1895, the Cubans tried to get independence from Spain. So again, the Cubans tried to get independence from Spain. Which led to tens of thousands dying from starvation and disease. Tens of thousands Cubans. And the American press saw an opportunity. The American press used a tool called yellow journalism. Which uses hyperbolic or extreme examples for their reporting to increase an emotional reaction. So again, there's a lot of hyperbole in yellow journalism. In fact, some yellow journalists published many fake claims. So again, yellow journalism is the use of hyperbolic language to elicit an emotional reaction. And sometimes they went so far as writing false claims. And because of this reporting, many Americans demanded that they involve themselves in Cuba. So again, because of this reporting, many Americans looked to the American government to involve themselves and stop what was going on. Then, in February of 18 1898. So again, February of 1898, the USS Maine exploded in Cuba. So the USS Maine, a boat, exploded in Cuba and killed 260 Americans. Congress suspected Spain and declared war. I apologize, my cat is misbehaving. So yes, the USS Maine explodes and they suspect Spain is behind it. So later in 1898, the US declares war on Spain, starting the Spanish-American War. So the Spanish-American War again starts in 1898. Yes, 1898. I apologize. One of my cats is freaking out. So the US declares war on Spain in 1898. The Spanish-American War happens. And it only lasts 4 months. So the US military wins against Spain in only 4 months. Which gives America access to Cuba. They were just Post-it notes. She's fine. And it hit the window. I promise. I'm really nice to my cats unless they're evil, which is often. Okay, so that is Latin America. There are other assets that Spain has that America is interested in besides Cuba, however. After the explosion of the USS Maine, the United States put some strategically placed boats outside of the Philippines, which was another Spanish territory. Through assistance and help from Filipino rebels. Also want to put a spelling convention in here in the chat. So Philippines with a PH is the island. I'm not going to say the island, the country. Filipino, if we refer to the people of the Philippines, is spelt with a F. So again, Philippines with a PH refers to the country. If I say the Filipino people, you spell it with an F, which is in the chat. So given with assistance from Filipino rebels, the United States was able to also capture or take over the Philippines. Again, they were able to capture the Philippines. Sorry, guys, I got to start speeding up. And then got control of the Philippines by August. So through the Spanish-American War, they were able to get the Philippines and Cuba. And because of where the Philippines are in the Pacific, this also gave the United States the ability to better take over Hawaii, which we discussed earlier in the lecture. And again, Hawaii becomes a territory. Hawaii is overthrown in 1893 and is annexed in 1898. Now, why is the United States so interested in this little island in the Pacific called the Philippines? It is because of China. So, as you guys might remember from world history, in the 1890s, China was pretty weak and had been split into areas called spheres of influence by European powers. And spheres of influence refer to who could involve themselves in what part of China. And the United States wanted to make sure they did not miss out. And so the United States proposes an open door policy. And what the open door policy refers to is that all nations should have equal trading privileges in China. So all countries should have equal access to China. And because of the strategic placement of the Philippines, the United States had a very close, a physically close relationship with China because of their control over the Philippines. So now, what is the result of the Spanish-American War and the very quick defeat of the Spain? Now the US has control of islands from the Caribbean and in the Pacific Ocean. I said that wrong. They controlled islands from the Caribbean to the Philippines. And so the United States wanted to try to figure out a better way to travel from the United States to in connecting the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. Before, they had to do this really long trek, as you can see in the on the map. Before the Panama Canal, to go from San Francisco to New York, it was about 12,000 miles because you had to go all the way around South America. But Theodore Roosevelt had an idea. Their idea was to go down to Panama, a country in Central America, to build a canal through it, which would shorten the distance from 12,000 miles to 4,000 miles. But there was a problem. The problem is Colombia, which was the country in charge. They wanted to make they wanted to make the canal, not the United States, which means they wanted full control of the they wanted full control of the canal, not the United States. And so the United States does what they typically do. In 1903, through help from the United States, the citizens of Panama revolt and gain independence from Colombia. So again, with the help from the United States, Panama revolts and gets independence from Colombia in 1903. And one of the terms for getting their help is the citizens of Panama had to sign the canal over to the United States. And that is how the United States gets control over the Panama Canal. Another issue after the Spanish and American War is, what do we do with this new territory that the United States gets from Spain? The terms of the Spanish-American War peace treaty give the United States control over Puerto Rico, Guam. So again, Puerto Rico, Guam, which is spelled G-U-A-M, and the Philippines. However, many Americans did not support the acquisition of the Philippines. So again, many Americans did not support the acquisition of the Philippines. And the people of the Philippines were also unhappy with the acquisition of the Philippines. They were under the assumption that they would get their independence after fighting with Spain. This leads to continuous conflict between the United States and the Philippines, which would cost thousands of lives. And the United States does not get control of the Philippines until 1902. Okay, just a couple more slides, you guys. So besides the actual physical fighting, the other big question is, what does the United States do with this territory? What kind of rights do these people get? How much power should we give them? Do they get to vote? Those are all of the big questions. Which refers to the question of following the flag. Does the Constitution follow the flag? So in Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Cuba, Hawaii, the United States flag is there, but do they get constitutional rights? And from 1901 to 1903, so again, 1901 to 1903, the Supreme Court ruled that constitutional rights are not automatically given. So again, the Supreme Court rules that constitutional rights are not automatically given to these territories. And while all of this is going on, Cuba becomes a problem again. At the end of the Spanish-American War, the United States troops decided to stay. But after a couple of years, Cuba wanted them out. And so the US passes the Platte Amendment, which is on the screen. It's Platte with 2 T's. The Platte Amendment was signed in 1901, which states that if the US troops leave, Cuba had to allow the United States to intervene in any foreign affairs that Cuba involved themselves with. So again, the United States can't intervene in any foreign affairs that Cuba finds themselves in. And the United States also gets to establish a permanent military base in Guantanamo Bay, which I will spell for you. I also just put it in the chat. So again, they have a permanent military base called Guantanamo Bay, which you guys might have heard of, and it's spelled Guantanamo, Guantanamo Bay. And this angered Americans so much that some even formed an anti-imperialist league. So again, some Americans are so angry that they form an anti-imperialist league, who is actually founded by somebody that you might remember, William Jennings Bryan. So William Jennings Bryan, the leader of the Populists, also forms the Anti-Imperialist League. Again, William Jennings Bryan, the founder of the Populists, is also the founder of the Anti-Imperialist League. Okay, I know it's getting late, so I'm just going to go through one more slide, but instead of doing like my narration thing, I'm just going to tell you guys the 2 big key terms that you need to know for this slide. So under Roosevelt and Taft, that's where most of this imperialism happens, is under these 2 presidencies. And the main things you need to know from them is first, the Roosevelt corollary, which is on the screen. Roosevelt corollary. Corollary is spelled C-O-R-O-L-L-A-R-Y. And Roosevelt corollary is a policy added to the Monroe Doctrine. So again, it's a policy that's added to the Monroe Doctrine. And what this does is not only does it prohibit European nations from involving themselves in Latin America, it also establishes the United States as the military force in Latin America. So not only is the United States saying, Europe, you stay out, we are also going to plant military bases in South America or Latin America. The next major policy is dollar diplomacy. Dollar diplomacy was passed by William Howard Taft, the president after Roosevelt. So dollar diplomacy was passed by Taft after Roosevelt. And it actually scales back imperialism. So it limits the amount of military presence the Americans have, but it also invests in the economics. So again, in dollar diplomacy, it focuses more on that dollar of the 5 Ds than actually the military. Okay, I'm going to stop there because it is after 8:50.